Hey, this is Kerry Lutz, and you are listening and watching the Financial Survival Network. And, well, we're going to be talking with a health expert about coronavirus, COVID-19, as they're calling it now. I prefer to call it the Wuhan Chi-Com infiltration virus. I don't think it started out that way, but never let a crisis go to waste, right? So,
Yes.
so our good friend here, Dr. Ted Noel, is with us, a fellow Floridian, and we want your emails, we want your questions. Why don't you send them to us? The email address is kl@kerrylutz.com, kl@kerrylutz.com. Dr. Noel, it's great to see you again.
It is
Um,
good to be here.
yeah, so you wrote an article, American Thinker, and I immediately saw it and I said, "Oh man, I haven't talked to Dr. Ted in too long. We got to have him on the show. We got to get to the bottom of this because my feeling, and I'm not a medical professional by any stretch of the imagination. Somebody asked me, where did I get my degree in epidemiology? And I basically told them the same place you got yours, except that I actually talked with an epidemiologist to try to find out exactly what the deal is here. And, well, I mean, the first thing I want to talk about, and because it's totally not being talked about, Dr. Ted, is seasonality. Generally, people do not get the flu in the spring and the summer unless you have some real issues going on. Do I have that right?
That's generally correct. And the real reason for it is it's warm and humid. And viruses don't like warm and humid. Now, the data on the Wuhan flu is not certain yet, but the expectation is it'll fade out as we get into the hotter, more humid parts of the year.
And I'm just I'm a recovering attorney, so I do kind of look at things a little different than most people, and I look for patterns. When I look at
Okay.
the map of the good old United States, do you know what I see? Aside from you know, all 57 states there, what I see, and that's a credit to
Yes. Oh,
former
yes.
President Obama. If you didn't know that, he once thought there were
The anointed
57
one.
states, the anointed one. When I look at the map, Dr. Ted, what I see is states in the north generally having a lot more cases than states in the south. And then you add to that population density. New York City is the most populated city in the country. LA is has a lot of people, but they're spread out. Chicago is densely populated, but it's a much smaller city than New York. Miami is it's actually not even that high population wise, but the more densely populated parts of Florida, we've got less than 5% of the cases in Florida that they have in New York. And now people are saying, well, all these New Yorkers are coming down and they're going to infect the Floridians. I'm not buying it.
It's in the wild. And that's an epidemiological term that people need to understand. When the Wuhan flu started in Wuhan, it was very, very localized. We know that had the Chicoms quarantined when they discovered they had a problem, 95% of the cases worldwide would never have happened.
Yeah.
And the reason is they could have contained it. Instead, they allowed 5 million visitors to presumably be exposed. And given the Diamond Princess data of 20% infection, they allowed a million vectors to go all over the world carrying this virus. Once you do that, you can't stop it.
Mm.
The other thing is, remember that we have a huge number of people who are infected but never show any symptoms. Those people are known as stealth carriers, and they can infect people. Now, the data we have, South Korean data says 86% of infected people are stealth carriers. The data that just came out of New York City says 85%. And we know that if someone is actively sick, they're shedding more virus, and they turn out to be about twice as infectious. Term that means twice the chance of me giving the bug to you as somebody who's a stealth carrier. You do the math, okay? It turns out that you are several times more likely to be infected from a stealth carrier as you are from a sick, in quotes, person.
Right. Hmm.
When you look at that, you now have a problem that you have literally millions of people everywhere who are being exposed when they don't know they're being exposed, and there's nothing they can do. If you have to buy groceries, you're going to get exposed.
Mm.
It's that simple. As a matter of fact, your chance of not being exposed, do the math. This is the upside down math, not your chance of being exposed. Your chance of not being exposed is less than 50-50 if you are in a place where in the last 2 hours there have been 16 or more people.
Oh my goodness. So everybody basically is going to be exposed. There's no
Exactly.
question about it. And and that's that. So we need to protect the people who are most vulnerable from exposure because we can't stop it from spreading. It's already there. When
Okay.
we when we
Yeah.
look at the Diamond Princess, and that was the ship that was quarantined, it was kind of like a modern day Voyage of the Damned. Nobody wanted them. Uh, go to Mexico, go to Alaska, go any place, but don't come to our country. But we saw 3,700 people, and of the 3,700 people that were on the ship, 20% were infected, and that was from constant exposure. According to Michael Levitt, Nobel Prize laureate, who not in medicine but in biophysics, but obviously he's kind of a numbers guy, had
Yep.
to be. He said 20%, 80% natural immunity, 20% infection, and of those 20%, roughly only 3% are going to be infected. So if we take those numbers, 20% of the US population is 60 66 million, and then
Right.
3% of that 3%, it's roughly 10 million people are going to be infected by it. And then it's who are the serious cases? What about the people who are most likely to sustain serious health consequences from exposure?
Okay. Those are the people that are demonstrated brilliantly by the Italian experience. In Lombardy, we have a 10% death rate because you have a tightly packed population of elderly people with multiple other diseases. Those are called
Mhm.
comorbidities. The average fatality in Lombardy had 2.7 comorbidities, and they only had a minuscule fraction that didn't have other problems. The average age of their mortalities was 82.
Wow.
So, advanced age, multiple comorbidities, there's your big problem. You dump that in. Oh, guess what? That's the Richland, Washington
Yeah,
sniff.
nursing home there, right?
The
Uh,
sniff, skilled nursing
uh,
facility. Yes.
Yeah, and so when we look at that, also in Italy, uh, they have multi-generational living. It's prevalent
Yes.
there. We don't really have much of that here in the U.S. as much. We put older people in nursing homes away from us, so less. That's a whole nother discussion whether that should be or
Well,
not. But
they also have socialized medicine, and they have drawn down for financial reasons the amount of care available.
hmm
And they took a number of these older people and said, I'm sorry, you don't have, as Zeke Emanuel would say, enough quality adjusted life years, enough qualities to make it worth treating you. That's why their mortality was high. And the same thing's going on in Spain.
Isn't that playing God, really? Who's to say that an 85-year-old person who's healthy, robust, interacts, maybe even takes care of their grandchildren, and then
Hmm.
you've got a 50-year-old drug abuser, but because they're 50, uh, they should be treated ahead because you're a drug abuser, suppresses your immune system, and you're much more likely to get it. So you're playing God by saying that 50-year-old drug addict, their life is worth more than an 85-year-old person who's vigorous and is a real asset to the community. So, what is the solution here? Because through their own folly, their own foibles, they have created a shortage of the type of medical care that's necessary to treat these people.
Well, we can go on and look at other things. In New York City, which has been under, aside from Giuliani, has been under Democrat control for God knows how long. Um, they have squandered their Medicaid money, and as a result, hospitals had to, well, first of all, you have Medicare, which does not pay hard costs.
Hmm.
It's below hard cost. Medicaid is even less good. And so, in order to maintain a hospital, you have to have enough paying patients to make up that difference.
Right.
Well, New York was so cheap with their Medicaid that you end up, there are 11 hospitals in New York that have closed,
I know.
and they're all in the lower income areas. So now you have a lower income area. You're going to have multi-generational living. They're tightly packed, all of the things that we saw in Lombardy.
Yeah. And New York is filthy. I lived there a long
Yes.
time. It's filthy, crammed together more than in Lombardy. And the first thing I did, I have two daughters that live there, and I said, they're gonna like do a lockdown there. Told my girls and their husbands' families, get the heck out of there. I felt like Kurt Russell from Escape from New York, Snake Plissken. I was like, I'm going to go there with the shotgun and the bandoliers of ammo around me to go break them out of New York. Uh, it really got that simple. I said, I don't know what's going to happen. I do know that basically Comrade De Blasio is a certifiable moron, and you can't.
Yes.
If civil unrest breaks out, you can't expect him to put a lid on it. He doesn't even want to. He probably thinks it's good because it's moving towards the communist goal. And and Andy Cuomo is just a total ideologue, opportunist politician, and you can't count on him. So who's going to send out the troops to protect New York? Fortunately, none of my fears, or most of them, have not manifested. But then, of course, you had the other aspect of it being a ripe petri dish for massive spread and infection of COVID-19. My younger daughter's brother-in-law got it. Everybody in his office got it. And hey, they're better off north of the city, spread out. They're bored. My daughter went and bought a Super Nintendo. She was so bored, and they're playing video games and working. But in all fairness, my kids are all hard workers. But this is a tremendous disruption. Was it worth shutting down the global economy for?
Unequivocally, no. We know from articles, studies done, published in Lancet after the economic downturn of 2008, that worldwide 500,000 people died of cancer who would not otherwise have died. Now, extrapolating that to the United States is a little different, maybe a little hard to get an exact number, but that would be an excess of over 7,000 US deaths just of cancer. And let me give you an example of how that could happen. We are shutting down all elective procedures. Oh, so ladies can't get their mammograms. We're not going to find the cancers, so they're not going to have their biopsies, and the cancers are going to advance into a less treatable stage, lower survival stage,
Of course.
because we shut down elective surgery. Um, we've got all kind. I mean, we can run the list. Joint replacements. How many people in England die because their total hip is delayed? They end up getting blood clots in their legs because they can't move around. A pulmonary embolus. Um, we can run the list. There's a bunch of these things. It's not just cancer.
Yeah.
There are a whole raft of uh, medical issues that are dealt with electively, that if we don't do them properly now, by delaying them, we cause more problems down the line. We just have to do this.
Yeah, they're
And
not really elective. They're just
mhm,
elective in whether you do it this week or next week or the week after, but they have to be done. Hey, and just think
the-
about all the deaths from the suicides, from bankruptcies,
mhm,
divorces, kids growing up in broken homes who wouldn't have otherwise, who then become criminals. The ramifications of this, and then people, self-medicating, overdosing on drugs, accidental overdoses, suicides, all of this. And for what? What did we do? We weren't able to stop the spread, and the people who were most vulnerable got infected. And because we're busy testing every man, woman, and child on the planet, rather than focusing the effort on those who are most vulnerable, those people go without care, and then we wind up with the Grand Inquisitor at the hospital who decides who shall live and who shall die.
okay. Now, that deals with the if it saves one life
Mm.
argument. But let's look at, and there's a wonderful article a week ago in statnews.com titled A Fiasco in the Making. As the coronavirus pandemic takes hold, we are making decisions without reliable data.
I saw that. Exactly the truth.
And they have a wonderful line in there talking about in trying to avoid the cat, the elephant fell off the cliff.
Yes, yes.
But the
That's
bottom
it.
line is when you look at the numbers, and let's go back at what we know for numbers. The South Korean data is very compelling. Unlike China, which said it's a 3.4% mortality, and that's what the World Health Organization took as gospel and pushed on us, along with saying it can't be transmitted human to human. They're the experts, aren't they?
Oh yeah.
Uh, it turns out the Wuhan mortality originally was actually 6%, but it's now come down, and part of that has to do with their mismanagement issues. South Korean mortality is right at 0.6%. The New York mortality looks at 1.3%, but by time you adjust it for what's going on, it's actually right at 0.2%.
Not much more than the common flu.
Well, it depends on which version of the common flu. The Spanish flu of 1918 had a 4% death rate. If I look at two other coronaviruses, SARS,
Hmm.
we all remember SARS had a 10% mortality, and MERS, another coronavirus, had a 40% mortality. We're treating this as if it was Ebola, that if you
Yeah.
get near it, you die. That's garbage. And the article in Stat News made a key point that by time you look at the uncertainty bands, that's a statistician's
Yeah.
discussion.
Sure.
On the low end, the risk of dying is 0.05%. That's about the same as getting hit by lightning while you're stepping off the curb. Okay.
Yeah.
Up to 0.6%. In other words, it could be a bad flu season or it could be nothing. And we have destroyed the world economy over nothing.
Yeah.
Now, I will back up for a minute because this was a new infection. And we briefly thought this thing could be horrible. We had no information, just what the Chicoms were giving us.
Which was bad, dirty data, as we called it
Well,
in computers.
and if we were to isolate China, and this would have happened before we realized they had 5 million possible vectors already out, then we would have had some rational action. But as soon as the South Korean data came in, and South Korea is an advanced economy with a good medical care system, and they were screening everybody, and the number came in at zero point 0.6, we should have sat down and said, 0.6 isn't a real great number. But if we look at it, that's maybe 30,000 deaths total. And if we look at the other side of what the harm will be, the harm is immense.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so
And
true.
30,000 deaths, while they're all tragic, not one death is ever too few.
Yeah. No, I totally hear what you're saying, and it's been my belief from the get-go that this had become a panic at every level of society. And when you look at the actual damage, 20, 30 trillion dollars to the world
Oh, it's
economy, that is
horrendous.
and it's all going to debt. We're not even going to talk about the economics of printing up $2 trillion. Actually, it's probably five. The banks are failing. Every major company in the United States, with the exception of Apple, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft, and a few others that carry, you know, $10 billion in cash or more, is in danger of going out of business here. Literally, you just shut down the global economy for a few months. Now, China, oh, they're all happy. We're getting back to work. Well, guess what, China? All your orders are getting canceled. So you're going into a major depression, and you just blew this whole pandemic thing. They just really made a mess of it because of the nature of totalitarian governments, which is always cover up a problem before you absolutely have to address it. It's exactly what they did. And then the way they treated
Hmm.
their own people with militaristic uh, quarantines, enforced quarantines, which there might be cause to do that, but in their case, they covered it up, said it was nothing. Then they found out it was something. Then they panicked and reverted true to form, totalitarian state. So when we look at this, doctor, and it's important to mention that you were a critical care doctor, so you
That's correct.
treated people with flu and bad flu in life-threatening situations. When you look at this, in all likelihood, one math PhD I know said between April 15th, between April 15th and May 15th, is an 80% chance that this thing goes away.
Okay. There's this is the perfect time to talk about the hockey stick.
Hmm.
And everybody has seen this curve. You have a few cases, and it's just flat all along.
And
And
then
then
boom,
suddenly it goes whoop,
yeah,
almost straight up.
parabolic.
Well, it's hyperbolic.
Yeah,
Okay. Slightly different mathematics.
sure.
It's really a hyperbolic rise.
Hmm.
Uh, and what happens here is once you have, well, I'll do it the direction your audience is going to see it from this way on up here. Once you've passed what's called the knee of the curve, that little bend that turns it up, you are now seeing a doubling every 2 days. And that is absolute ironclad proof that the horse is out of the barn. This thing is in the wild. It is everywhere. You cannot stop it. There is no quarantine measure that can stop it, whatever. The natural things, we've talked about the natural things that can stop it. One is we reach a season where the virus doesn't survive. Okay. The other thing that stops it is that it runs out of victims.
Right. So it
And
runs out of
that can
fuel.
happen a couple of ways. The normal flu, we get shots. So we have what's called herd immunity with a wide number of people who are immunized by shots. The other thing was something my mother did when I was a little kid.
Oh,
The
sure.
neighbor kid got chicken pox. All of us were sent over to play with him.
Yeah, we did that.
And the idea was you're going to get a mild case of chicken pox, you're going to be sick for a couple of days, and then bigger problems don't happen from it.
Right. Better to get
Uh,
it younger than later.
yeah. And I remember the same thing with mumps. And then my grandfather got a case of the mumps when he was old, and the problems were serious. So, this is another way you create herd immunity, and it
Hmm.
takes typically 80% to be immune to shut down the curve. They're talking about bending the curve down. It goes here, it goes up. We're going to force it down. No, we
Mm-mm.
don't have an immunization. You have no tools to force it down. You can't run out of victims by hiding them because you can't hide them.
Hmm.
See what's going on is all of this stuff we're hearing about every day from the White House with Anthony Fauci and Dr. Blix up there talking about we need this, we're doing that, da da da. They're giving you this
Hmm.
very serious discussion overlooks that key phrase. You cannot hide from this virus in a way that allows you to live. I mean, if we put everybody in a box for 3 weeks,
Yeah,
you wouldn't infect anybody else. But the fact is, they'd all be dead.
yeah, yeah. So the
You do
cure,
have to go to the
yeah,
grocery store. And so you end up with an impossible task, and the political class has not recognized that. Now, the question really is, are are we protecting you? Am I protecting you individually, or are you protecting me? Supposedly, they're saying we're going to protect me. Now, the only one who can protect me is me. And do I need to be protected? I am
yeah.
67 years old, so I'm in that class, but I don't have all the comorbidities. So I have no problem going to a restaurant.
Hmm.
And golf courses, they're shutting down. My local 9-hole, gorgeous course, Winter Park, they closed down last week. They're afraid of all this. It's the safest place in the world to be because ultraviolet from the sun kills the virus.
Exactly. And humidity. They're
Hmm.
watering it all the time, so you got like huge humidity and the heat. It's heating up in Florida. It's mid 80s and it's starting to get sticky. The time of year that we hate the most in Florida is actually the safest to be out there with this virus. So, what about the fact they're restricting these quinine based drugs, chloroquine and hydrochloroquine? And what is they're approving it for compassionate use, which means you have to be half dead before they'll allow it to be used on you. And yet, every doctor out there has been writing scripts for themselves and their families, stocking up on it. And quinine, which it's based on, you could go be drinking 5 bottles of tonic water a day, probably get 400 or 500 milligrams of quinine in your system, and that's going to help immunize you from it or treat it in any event.
That's an interesting thought on the tonic water. Hadn't thought of that one. But one of the problems we have with the quinine derivatives is simply a supply problem. And do we have enough for all the cases that are out there? Because this drug was used for a lot of people for arthritis.
Autoimmune issues. Yeah.
Yeah, rheumatoid arthritis and all of its variants.
Lupus. Yeah.
And we're going to have to take some of them off of that to divert it to where it's, from I'm going to help you feel better to I'm going to save somebody's life. And so you're ending up with a triage until you can get enough of the stuff on board. Compassionate use, we have a real problem with the FDA. And it's the Kefauver amendments from back in 70s, I think it is.
Mm.
And what they did was change the approval for drugs from safe to safe and effective.
Efficacious.
And they increased the cost of drugs by a full order of magnitude doing that.
Yeah.
And in order for the FDA to license something, they say it's safe and effective for this. Now you can use it off label, and 80% of all drug use of all sorts is off label.
I know.
Because once it's approved, the doc says, I don't need all of those studies or all of the approvals. I have the studies.
Mm.
And every study that we've seen, whether they be the original 15 out of France or the 300 or 400 out of Dubai, they all show dramatic benefits. And the quinine derivatives plus azithromycin. Azithromycin does nothing on its own, but
Yeah.
together they're a miracle cocktail.
It's a synergistic effect with
Right.
the Zithromax and the quinine-based drugs. So the FDA, by keeping this away from people, I understand there's an existing user base already, and you got to consider them. But this stuff like can be manufactured very rapidly. We
Oh,
won't
yes.
even we won't even get into the China thing. They've been taking quinine. I remember World War II hearing about the soldiers. They were taking quinine pills, straight
Right.
quinine. Now they've figured out how to basically turbocharge them. But the doctor who figured out that this stuff would work looked at the map just like I did and said, "Hey, There's not much of this in Africa. What could it be? Well, they're always getting malaria in Africa, and everybody's taking quinine-based drugs.
Yep.
And brilliant association, just like when you look at the map and you see it's a lot worse in the north than it is in the south, but not all, because you need those other factors. But in New York City, you have them, because in California, California was originally at the top of the heap, Washington State. Now they've fallen back. The number of new cases coming up there, it seems to have slowed down. Same here in Florida. It looks like we're getting 100 to 200 cases a day, which, is serious, but it's manageable. Well, when you look at all of this, you got to wonder where we're headed here and how we're going to address this. Anyways, we kind of reached the end of our time here, Doctor, but it's so good to have you on, so good to connect with you again, and to
All
get some
right.
common sense on this. Hey, people want to find out more about you. Where is the place to go?
I have a Facebook page, Dr. Ted. I do occasional videos, and then my latest one is on this subject on YouTube. Again, look for Dr. Ted, and I post on Twitter as just look up Dr. Ted.
All
I
right,
had
Dr. Ted.
a different name, and this was the one people liked.
Okay, that's great. Hey, well, it's so funny. When we were speaking, the last time we were talking a lot was during the presidential election, and you were kind of making observations about the other candidates' health, state of health, not making conclusions. Just to go back to that, all of these psychiatrists have come in, basically thousands of them, and say that Donald Trump is insane. I'd like to see their evaluation of his primary opponent, who isn't going to be the candidate, by the way, Joe Biden. Where are these psychiatrists and psychologists for a guy who is obviously suffering from advanced stages of dementia to the point where he is about to become violent on the campaign trail? You and I know it. No one else. This is truly, this is a case where not only does the emperor have no clothes, but the people are blind, so they can't even see that the emperor has been disrobed.
Well, the changes over the last 2 years with Joe Biden are relatively dramatic,
Yeah,
and I
frightening.
have been forced to start preparing a video on that.
Yeah, well, you can rest easy, Doctor. You're probably not going to have to get involved. I've said from the get go, he is merely a placeholder. He was there, his primary function, to defeat Bernie Sanders. Originally, they were going to let the field split up and do a brokered convention. Bernie gathered a little bit too much momentum. Then they had to take him out, and therefore they forced all the other candidates to drop out. Bloomberg was kind of like the hero in that movie, The Great White Hope, where the blacks are taking over boxing, and they have this one guy, and they know he can't beat the hero of the movie, the black boxer. Can't remember his name, and so then they basically forced the black guy to take a dive, and this is what's happened here. It's devolved into a state where even if they get Cuomo in there, it's not going to matter. Anyway, Doctor, hey, questions or comments? You've finally heard from somebody who actually knows what they're talking about, treated people in conditions close to what the coronavirus has induced or caused, and getting true facts, true information out there. That's our purpose. We want to hear from you. Email us kl@kerrylutz.com, kl@kerrylutz.com. Twitter feed's at Kerry Lutz. Facebook page is Financial Survival Network. And of course, our home site where you should go and sign up for your free newsletter is financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Dr. Ted, we will talk to you again real soon.
Thanks again, and I'll be happy to help answer some of those questions that come in.